An important part of New England's food culture is its food history. So I spoke with Victoria Haynes, the coordinator of households and foodways at Old Sturbridge Village in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, over Zoom to find out what food in New England was like 200 years ago.
I both work in costume in front of the public, doing hearth cooking and milking and butchering and pickling and preserving and all those parts of sort of 19th century work. But I also am the person who trains our village staff in foodways at the museum. So for Old Sturbridge Village, I should say, we're an 1830s living history museum. Specifically, it's 1838 rural New England. And I say those things because they all make pretty big differences. You know, how people change, how people eat, of course, changes throughout history. And being out in rural New England, we might be a little slower to change than some people in Boston might be, nor do we have the same access to things that someone in a seaport like Boston might have. So Sturbridge, the town we show, is 2 days away from the coast by coach. So you could get to Worcester and then about a full day to go from Worcester to Boston, just to keep that in the back of your mind when it comes to like food I could buy. For a farm family, they're producing as much of their food as they possibly can themselves at home. That being said, there is no such thing as like true self-sufficiency in the 1830s. Most people, it seemed, expected to have meat on their table 2 meals a day, prepared fresh for dinner, their noontime and largest meal of the day, and then usually repurposed for breakfast in the morning. Though it might not be uncommon to see meat repurposed on the supper or tea table in the evening as well. Cookbooks are an interesting thing in the early 19th century because they are, for a long time, written for rich people. So they're written for wealthy people who have people cooking for them. If you are in a city, like if you're in Boston in 1838, there are grocers and people like that, much more like how we picture buying things today. But in a town like Sturbridge, there might be a couple different country stores. I compare it to having Walmart and Target both in your same town, whoever you feel like doing business with. And that store is loaded with things from the entire world, or at least as much as the entire world as I think these people are wrapping their minds around. So a huge amount of that store by the 1830s is actually textiles and textile goods, since we are now at a point that most people intend to produce their own clothes, but not produce their own fabrics anymore. That's a huge amount of the store stock. They also have things like plates and dishes and cutlery. They have inks and they have toothbrushes and patent medicines and all sorts of things. I feel like the Target, Walmart kind of comparison, just, scaled way down. It's probably the best to sort of a modern department store where it's just one room, or maybe a couple rooms, but it's got all these things packed into it. But they do also have a bunch of food. There's a good amount of trade farm to farm too. So if you don't make cheese and you want cheese and you live in a rural town, you don't go to the store and pay the middleman for cheese. You just buy cheese from your neighbor. There's a lot of that happening too, or people trading for goods or services or other things as well. But people are still eating off of their knives. Their fork is there just mainly for stabilizing, holding things still, and then the cutting and delivering of food to the mouth is done with the knife. People also had spoons that they put out at their tables too, potentially as a reaction to how people are eating, where people wear their napkins, or serviettes as they would be called in the 19th century, changes with how people eat and how they use cutlery. So in the 1830s, your table, like I said, has a tablecloth, has your plate, has your serviette or your napkin folded on your plate, has your knife and your fork, a spoon if necessary, and a cup for you. Your serviette or napkin is unfolded and not laid upon your lap, but draped across your chest. Let's talk about carrot pie. Okay, so the carrot pie receipt comes from, there's multiple carrot pies. The one that's up there comes from Lady Maria Child. It is a wonderful example of a 19th century receipt for its brevity. The entire receipt for carrot pie says carrot pies are made like squash pies. The carrot should be boiled very tender, skinned and sifted. Both carrot pies and squash pies should be baked with an out and upper crust in deep plates, baked about an hour in a quite warm oven. I love that. I love that as a 19th century recipe. By this point, we do have standard measurements. There are a cup and a pint and a lot of times it's half pint and a gill. They're all real measurements, but you still have a lot of people who cook a lot of things sort of because someone taught them to cook it beforehand. And you also see a lot of receipts where they don't bother listing out a lot of little details, particularly if they feel like they've already said them. So she does have a pretty long entry on pumpkin pies, but I love that one because it's just like, I already told you all that stuff.